Lululemon was initially known for selling women's yoga clothes, but impressively has since expanded into so many different areas of fashion, to a point where it is now considered to be among the largest and most valuable clothing brands. I'm sorry, it's hard for me to say the name Lululemon and be serious about it, but it is one of the biggest success stories over the past few decades. Listen to this, the company has been consistently profitable since 2005 and has reported rising sales every year since then, reaching over $10 billion for the first time in 2024, making it a Fortune 500 company. Clearly, this is already an interesting story, and I would argue that some of the most interesting parts of it are happening right now. See, after 20 plus years of mostly strong and stable performance, Lululemon has been showing signs of trouble. The most obvious reflection of that can be seen in their stock price. Given all those graphs I just showed you, you might be surprised to learn that the company has lost over half of its value since the start of 2025, which translates to about $20 billion. Now, right away, I want to be clear that Lululemon is not on the verge of bankruptcy or shutting down or anything like that, but a lot of people have been losing faith in the company's future. They do not see it as being as promising as they did before, and a lot of that uncertainty comes from failing to meet expectations. What I mean by that is a few years ago, they announced this big 5-year plan that involved their sales from 2021 doubling by 2026 to about $12.5 billion. And as that date approaches, it is looking less and less likely that they will achieve that goal, mainly because their sales in the United States have mostly fallen flat, and considering that the United States is by far their biggest market, that is concerning. Lately, it seems like every time they announce their earnings and sales figures, they come in below expectations, and that causes yet another drop in their stock price. People are speculating that Lululemon may have very well hit its peak, maybe operating more than 750 worldwide locations is saturating the market, and there's not much more room to grow. So in this video, I think it is a great opportunity to talk about the history of this brand while outlining what I believe to be some of the biggest reasons behind this potential decline. In 1998, Chip Wilson opened the first Lululemon in Vancouver, Canada. It was partially a yoga studio and partially a retail store, so as you might expect, the brand was closely tied to yoga. He had recently sold his previous company, which was a surfing and snowboarding apparel brand called West Beach. He got involved with yoga to improve his balance and noticed how most of the clothes that people were wearing were not stretchy or ideal for that activity. Given his previous experience in the industry, he was able to create a trendy line of higher-end clothing for it that attracted a lot of attention. He would work with local yoga teachers to advise on the clothing and help promote it to their students. It was during a time when yoga was becoming much more popular, so the company was able to grow along with it. It started out with a cult-like following that transitioned into mainstream success, very similar to yoga itself. In 2005, he sold 48% of the company to private equity firms for about $100 million that was used in part to open new locations. 2 years later, Lululemon had a public stock offering that raised another $240 million that was also used to open new stores. And by the way, that stock price more than tripled over the first few months of trading. It was featured on popular television shows, notably Desperate Housewives, that helped spread awareness and demand for their products. My first reason behind the recent struggles of Lululemon is pretty straightforward: economic factors. This right here is everything you might expect and probably even a little more added to it. Interest rates and inflation have caused many people to shy away from premium brands like Lululemon in favor of cheaper alternatives. Recent tariffs have been estimated to impact their earnings by $240 million, and the response to it has been to raise prices of certain items, which could potentially make the inflation issue even worse for them, in addition to a previous exemption on imports under $800 coming to an end. Overall, rising costs that are mostly beyond their control are expected to have a lasting impact on their profits, further complicating an already questionable situation. For the next reason behind their struggles, I'm going to say buying Mirror, which I realize might sound confusing at first, but if you remember, Mirror was basically an at-home fitness trend. It was this $1,500 $1,500 mirror that you would mount on your wall, and for a subscription fee, it would show live classes or personal training sessions or whatever else. The company started in 2018, and as you might expect, gained a lot of traction during the pandemic, while the gyms were closed and people were working out at home much more often. Well, halfway through 2020, Mirror was bought by Lululemon for $500 million. It was their first ever acquisition and probably their boldest attempt to diversify their business. Remember, Lululemon had already expanded beyond the comparatively narrow market of women's yoga apparel into men's clothing and the stuff you wear for all these other sports and activities. Buying Mirror was like an attempt to expand into other areas of fitness, create a steady revenue stream, and maybe even open the door to future opportunities. However, as the gyms reopened and people started returning to them instead of exercising at home, Mirror struggled to live up to the company's high expectations of it. In 2023, Lululemon recorded a $443 million impairment charge related to Mirror, essentially recognizing that it had lost most of its value. Later that year, Lululemon signed a partnership with Peloton, essentially marking the end of Mirror and making their first acquisition kind of a disaster. It was a lot of wasted time and money that would have been better spent somewhere else. Next up on the list might just be the single most impactful reason behind Lululemon's recent struggles: competition. Athleisure is another thing that gained a lot of traction while people were staying home during the pandemic, and the demand for it has remained remarkably strong ever since. According to the company's current CEO, the competitive landscape is different today than it was even 2 or 3 years ago, and I think most people would agree with that, given all these comparable premium brands that have been emerging, like Rhone or Aloe, which has been associated with Kylie Jenner. Many of them have been specifically opening locations near Lululemon stores to try to lure customers away. The one that stands out to me the most is Vuori. It started in 2015 as a small business selling men's shorts, and in less than a decade has grown to a $5.5 billion valuation. They had announced a plan to grow to 100 locations by 2026. That has already been accomplished ahead of schedule. And then we also have to consider competition from lower priced alternatives, because going back to inflation, people tend to gravitate toward cheaper brands when they're looking for ways to save money. Notably, Target started an athleisure brand called All in Motion in 2020 that reached over $1 billion in sales within the first year. Believe it or not, there's even been aggressive competition coming from Costco, to a point where Lululemon has filed a lawsuit against them for allegedly selling deceptively comparable designs for like 10% of the price. They say that in some cases, an ordinary observer would not be able to tell the difference, and just from my own observation, some of these Kirkland brand products do look suspiciously similar to stuff being sold by Lululemon. So even though the overall market has grown recently, it has become much more divided, so arguably more than ever, Lululemon needs to be on top of their game and find ways to stand out from the others, leading me into the next reason: stale products. Now, I want to be clear that I am not saying Lululemon has a terrible selection, nor am I even qualified or knowledgeable enough to make an accusation like that. However, I think even the company itself would agree that their products have not been as strong as they need to be. In 2024, their key product officer left the company. For the previous 5 years, she had been a major influence over the company's creative decisions, and many people believe that she is a big factor behind the company's success over that time. A couple months later, maybe coincidentally, they decided to stop selling their breeze-through leggings because they were unpopular with customers due to an unflattering design. Not a major issue in the overall picture, but maybe an indicator that they're becoming disconnected from what the customers want. In 2025, their CEO declared, "We have become too predictable within our casual offerings and missed opportunities to create new trends." So to address that, the plan from here is to offer more new styles, currently representing 23% of their product mix, but predicted to increase to 35% over the next few months. I don't know what else to say here, because it is difficult to prove that a company has stale products, so please let me know your opinion about it. Have you noticed yourself exploring competing brands more often because Lululemon seems to have fewer options that capture your attention, or is everything in their stores as new and as exciting as ever? For my final reason, I will admit that it might be a little bit of a stretch, but I think it is fitting to briefly highlight a few controversies over the years that may have pushed people away from the brand. Throughout most of it, Lululemon has been surprisingly resilient, but certain things can have lasting effects on a brand's reputation and the public's perception of it, which can be especially impactful when it comes to fashion. Even the name of the company, Lululemon, might be a little scandalous. Founder Chip Wilson says that he wanted a name with a lot of L's in it, essentially because it would sound foreign to a Japanese person and be difficult for them to pronounce. So the reasoning behind the name may have been problematic and somewhat confusing. In 2007, they were selling a line of products that they said had health benefits because it was made with seaweed. They said that it would reduce stress and detoxify and hydrate. Well, the New York Times commissioned a test that showed that there was no evidence of seaweed in that clothing. In 2013, you might remember, because it was a big story, that they had to recall pants that proved to be too transparent. And then the founder and still chairman of the board at the time, Chip Wilson, made some comments trying to rationalize the issue that ended up insulting a lot of people. So he issued an apology that was also unpopular. The hole just kept getting deeper, so soon after, he stepped down from the board of directors. In 2018, I'll mention that the CEO of Lululemon at the time resigned without warning, partially due to a relationship with one of their designers that was against the company's policy. Again, these are just some of the scandals that received negative attention, and my guess is that Lululemon would be at least a little stronger today if they never happened. Let me know in the comments, what are your thoughts about Lululemon? Are the recent struggles nothing more than a small misstep that will have a quick recovery, or are they reflecting deeper issues that will continue to pull them down? And if so, what do they need to do to reverse the trend and make investors believe in them again? We could be at a turning point of a massive business story, so I'm excited to hear where you think things might be heading. And any other thoughts you have about Lululemon, leave them in the comments. I'd like to hear what you have to say. Thank you for watching.